Murder at the funeral before the body was cold. A Hercule Poirot. Mystery chronicled by Captain Arthur Hastings.
In the most unlikely places murder finds its opportunity. This case proved that truth with a vengeance. Death wore a monk's hood and told the hours at Greave Hall, and it fell to my friend Hercule Poirot to strip away centuries of legend and expose the all-too-human hand behind the horror. Prepare yourself, reader. A puzzle awaits, and it is among the darkest we have ever faced. Chapter 1. The House That Drinks the Light. I should say at the outset that I nearly did not accompany Poirot to Greave Hall at all. I had been in Scotland visiting an old army friend, and was not due back in London for another week when the telegram arrived. It was characteristically terse, come at once. Greave Hall, Northumberland. Bring revolver? Poirot. The instruction regarding the revolver decided the matter. Poirot did not make such requests lightly. I cut short my visit, caught the first available train south, and then north again, and arrived at the village of Grievemouth on a bitter October afternoon, having spent the better part of 12 hours in railway carriages of declining comfort. The village itself was a grim little settlement clinging to the Northumberland coast like a barnacle to a rock, consisting of a single street of grey stone houses, a church, 2 public houses, and an air of determined endurance against the elements. The wind off the North Sea was savage, carrying with it a fog that rolled inland in great slow waves, blotting out the landscape as though nature herself wished to conceal it. I found no car waiting for me at the station, and after inquiries at the more respectable of the 2 public houses, I secured the services of a local man with an ancient motor car, who agreed, with considerable reluctance, to drive me to Greave Hall. His reluctance, I noted, increased markedly when I named my destination. Greave Hall, he repeated, as though I had asked to be driven to the gates of hell. You're sure about that, sir? Quite sure. Monsieur Poirot is expecting me. The foreign gentleman, aye. He said nothing more for the duration of the journey, which took us along a cliff road of alarming narrowness, the sea invisible below us, but audible as a constant hungry roar. The fog thickened as we climbed. By the time the car lurched to a halt before a pair of iron gates, visibility had been reduced to perhaps 10 yards. I'll not drive up, the man said flatly. You can walk from here, it's not far. It was, in fact, nearly half a mile uphill in fog so dense I could barely see my own feet. The drive was unpaved and rutted, lined with trees that loomed out of the murk like spectral sentinels, their bare branches interlocking overhead to form a tunnel of sorts. I walked with my hand on my revolver, not from any rational expectation of danger, but from the atavistic unease that the place inspired. Every sound was magnified and distorted. The crunch of my boots on gravel seemed to echo from multiple directions. Somewhere to my left, water dripped with metronomic regularity. Somewhere ahead, a bird, or something, uttered a single harsh cry and fell silent. I emerged from the tree-lined drive, and there, rising from the fog like a cliff face, was Greave Hall. My first impression was of sheer, yet oppressive mass. The house was enormous, far larger than I had expected, a sprawling accretion of centuries piled one upon another without apparent plan or mercy. I could make out portions of it through the fog, a Norman tower, squat and brutal, anchoring one end, a Tudor wing with tall chimneys and mullioned windows, a Georgian facade tacked onto the front with the confident incongruity of an age that believed itself superior to all that had preceded it. The overall effect was of a building at war with itself, each era's addition contradicting its neighbours in style, material and intention. The windows were dark, save for a faint glow on the ground floor that might have been firelight. The place looked uninhabited. It looked, if I am honest, uninhabitable. The front door was massive, an iron-studded oak that might have withstood a battering ram. I found a bell pull and hauled on it. Somewhere within the depths of the house, a bell clanged with sepulchral resonance. I waited. The The fog pressed against my back like something sentient. The door was opened by a woman of perhaps 55, built on solid, capable lines, with iron grey hair pulled back severely from a face that was professionally neutral but not unwelcoming. She held a candle in one hand. The electricity, I would soon learn, was not to be relied upon, and examined me with the swift, assessing glance of a housekeeper who has spent decades managing households and the people within them. "Captain Hastings, I expect," she said. "Monsieur Poirot said you would come. I am Mrs. Bell, the housekeeper. Please come in out of the weather." The entrance hall was vast and vaulted, the ceiling lost in shadows that even the electric lamps, burning fitfully, as though the current that fed them was irregular, could not penetrate. The floor was flagged with enormous slabs of blackened stone uneven with age, and the walls were a bewildering patchwork of periods and styles. Norman arches framed Tudor doorways, Gothic windows narrow as arrow slits, punctured walls panelled in dark Jacobean oak. A staircase of indeterminate age rose at the far end, its balustrade carved with figures that might have been saints or gargoyles. In the uncertain light, it was impossible to determine which. The cold was immediate and profound, not the clean, bracing cold of the outdoors, but something damp and insinuating, a cold that rose from the stones and settled into the bones with what felt like deliberate malice. "Monsieur Poirot is in the drawing-room," Mrs. Bell said, leading me through a labyrinth of corridors. "He arrived 2 days ago. I should tell you, Captain, that the house is not comfortable. We do our best, but the building defeats us at every turn." 2 days? I was surprised. Poirot's telegram had given no indication he had already been in residence. He came at Mr. Cavendish's invitation, a private matter, though it's become rather less private since. She paused at a door, her expression carefully controlled. "Things have been happening, Captain, things I cannot explain, and I am not a woman given to fancy. Monsieur Poirot will tell you. I only ask that you keep an open mind." She opened the door, and I found myself in a room that, by Greave Hall's austere standards, approached something like comfort. A fire burned in an enormous stone fireplace, actually drawing properly, which I would later learn was a rarity. The furniture was old but serviceable, and there, positioned in an armchair with the precision of a man who has measured the optimal distance from the hearth, sat Hercule Poirot. He was immaculate, naturally. The suit was pressed, the moustaches were magnificent, the patent leather shoes gleamed in the firelight, but I knew my friend well enough to detect the signs of strain beneath the polished exterior. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and a tightness around his mouth that spoke of concentration sustained over many hours without relief. "Ah, Hastings!" He rose and grasped my hand with genuine warmth. "You have come. Excellent. I'd feared the fog might defeat you. It nearly did. Poirot, what on earth is going on? Your telegram mentioned a revolver. And you have brought it?" "In my coat pocket." "Bon. We may have need of it before this business concludes. But first, sit down, warm yourself. Mrs. Bell, would you be so kind as to bring my friend some tea? He has had a long journey, and looks, if I may say so, rather the worse for it." When the housekeeper had departed, Poirot's manner changed. The social warmth remained, but beneath it was something harder, more focused. He regarded me with the expression I knew well, the expression that meant he was about to describe a situation of considerable complexity and required my full attention. "Hastings, I must tell you about this house and the people in it. I must tell you about a curse that may be genuine, or may be the most elaborate murder plot I've ever encountered, and I must tell you that a man's life hangs in the balance, and I am not yet certain I can save it." He told me Gerald Cavendish, our host, was a barrister of Poirot's acquaintance. Not a close one, but a man Poirot knew to be rational, methodical, and not given to hysteria. His letter, arriving at Poirot's seaside hotel 10 days earlier, had been the letter of a man genuinely afraid. He had inherited Greave Hall and a considerable fortune from his cousin Nathaniel Cavendish, who had died the previous December of what Dr. Marcus Frome, the local physician had certified as a stroke. The inheritance had been unexpected. Gerald and Nathaniel had not been close, but the will was clear, properly witnessed, and legally unassailable. Within weeks of taking possession, Gerald had begun to experience what he described as disturbances. Sounds in the night, footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing without human agency. Cold spots that persisted even in rooms where fires burned. And then, 3 weeks ago, Gerald's son Philip had seen something on the cliff path at dusk. A figure in a dark monk's robe, walking slowly toward the ruins of the old chapel, its hood drawn up to conceal its face. "The mourner," Poirot said quietly. "The what?" "The mourner of Greave. It is the local legend, Hastings. This house was built on the ruins of a medieval monastery. In the 16th century, during the dissolution, the last prior, a man called Brother Anselm, was dragged from his chapel and executed on the cliffs. As he died, he's said to have pronounced a curse upon the house and all who would possess it, that none should hold Greave in peace, and that when the hour of the master's death approached, a hooded figure would walk the cliff path in mourning for the soul about to depart. Good Lord. The legend is well documented. Every master of Greave Hall who has died in the house has reportedly been preceded by a sighting of the mourner. It is a remarkably consistent tradition, spanning 4 centuries, and now Philip Cavendish has seen it. Gerald, understandably, is terrified. But surely it's nonsense, ghosts, curses. You don't believe in any of that, Poirot. I believe in what can be observed, tested and verified, mon ami. And what I've observed in 2 days at Greave Hall is this. Someone is going to extraordinary lengths to convince Gerald Cavendish that the curse is real and that his death is imminent. The question is who, and the greater question is why. He described the household. Gerald himself was a thin, nervous man in his late 40s, a competent lawyer but a poor leader of people, cold in manner and tight with money. His wife, Sylvia, was a handsome woman of 42, well-bred but impoverished before her marriage, who had exchanged romantic possibility for financial security and found the bargain bitter. Their son, Philip, was 23, and already showing the marks of dissolution, drinking too much, accomplishing too little, consumed by resentment toward a father he considered cold and unjust. Gerald's sister, Miss Edith Cavendish, was 60 years old and formidable. She had lived at Greave Hall for decades, first as companion to the previous owner, then as a fixture of the household that no one had the courage to remove. She wore habitual black, possessed the posture of a governess and the temperament of a hanging judge, and believed in the curse with the unshakable conviction of a woman for whom the supernatural provided a more satisfying explanation of life's cruelties than mere human inadequacy. Dr. Marcus Frome was the local physician, 55, a widower with intelligent grey eyes and careful manners. He had attended the Cavendish family for 20 years and was Gerald's closest thing to a friend, though the relationship seemed built more on proximity and habit than genuine affection. Mrs. Delphine Roscoe was a widow in her middle 40s, handsome and self-possessed, who occupied rooms in the East Wing under an arrangement that Poirot had not yet fully understood. She was described as a friend of the family, but whose friend precisely was unclear. And finally Edmund Teller, a scholar of local history, perhaps 50 years old, who had been granted residence in the house 3 years earlier by the late Nathaniel Cavendish in exchange for cataloguing and preserving the estate's historical archives. He was grey-haired, ink-stained, and possessed the distracted air of a man who lived more comfortably among centuries-old documents than among living people. 7 suspects, I said, counting on my fingers. 8, if you include the servants. But I think the servants may be eliminated, at least as principals. The person behind this requires knowledge, resources, and above all, patience. The campaign has been building for months, Hastings. It did not begin with Philip's sighting. It began long before that. Campaign? You make it sound military. It is military in its way. A systematic assault on one man's reason and courage, designed to break him down so completely that when the killing blow falls, it will appear to be the inevitable fulfillment of ancient prophecy rather than common murder. Before I could respond, the door opened and Gerald Cavendish entered. I saw at once what Poirot meant about the man's condition. He was thin to the point of gauntness, his face the colour of old parchment, his eyes sunken and restless. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who expects the floor to give way beneath him. When Poirot introduced me, Gerald shook my hand with fingers that trembled visibly. "Captain Hastings, you're welcome, though I fear you will find this house poor hospitality. Monsieur Poirot has told you of our situation." "He has, and I want you to know, Mr. Cavendish, that we are here to help." "Help?" He repeated the word as though testing its weight. "I hope so. I very much hope so. Because the alternative—" He stopped, swallowed, and managed a smile of excruciating effort. "The dressing gong sounds at 7:30, though I should warn you it is somewhat unreliable, as indeed is much else in this house." He departed, and I looked at Poirot with concern. "He's in a bad way. He is a man who believes he's going to die, Hastings, and a man who believes he's going to die is already halfway to the grave. That is what makes this plot so diabolically clever. The curse does half the murderer's work for them. All that remains is the final push." I was shown to my room by a maid who did not meet my eyes, and who departed with a haste that bordered on panic. The room was large, cold, and dominated by a four-poster bed hung with dark velvet curtains. The fire smoked. The sheets, when I touched them, were damp. The mirror above the washstand was foxed and dim, and the towels were thin as muslin. I unpacked, washed as best I could, and descended to dinner feeling that I had stepped not merely into another house, but into another century, one that predated such innovations as central heating, adequate plumbing, and the general principle that human beings should not be expected to live in conditions better suited to the storage of root vegetables. The company was assembled in the drawing-room when I arrived, and Poirot performed the introductions with his customary precision. Sylvia Cavendish was indeed handsome, in the brittle way of a woman whose beauty has begun its retreat from nature to maintenance. She greeted me with cool politeness and a hand as cold as the rest of the house. Her eyes, I noticed, moved constantly, to Gerald, to Philip, to the windows, as though tracking multiple threats simultaneously. Philip Cavendish stood by the window with a glass already in hand, staring out at the fog-bound darkness with the fixed intensity of a man willing himself elsewhere. He was tall, fair, and would have been good-looking but for the telltale signs of excess, the slight puffiness of the face, the tremor of the hands, the too bright eyes. He shook my hand without enthusiasm and returned to his vigil. Miss Edith Cavendish examined me as though I were a dubious invoice presented for payment. She wore her habitual black, stood with the rigidity of a woman who considered relaxation a moral failing, and pronounced herself pleased to make my acquaintance in a tone that communicated the precise opposite. Dr. Frome was pleasant and professional, a man of careful manners who inquired about my journey with the practised warmth of someone accustomed to putting anxious patients at ease. Mrs. Roscoe was more direct, assessing me with dark, intelligent eyes, and remarking that she had heard a great deal about Monsieur Poirot's cases, and wondered whether the accounts were exaggerated for literary effect. I assured her they were not. She looked unconvinced. Edmund Teller shook my hand with vague warmth, and immediately began telling me about the monasteries of Northumberland. He was a thin, grey man with ink-stained fingers, and the distracted manner of someone who existed primarily in his own thoughts, surfacing into the present moment only when absolutely required. I rather liked him. Dinner was announced, not by the unreliable gong, but by Mrs. Bell appearing in the doorway, and we processed into the dining-room. It was a long, narrow chamber lined with dark panelling, the walls hung with ancestral portraits, whose subjects regarded us with expressions ranging from disapproval to undisguised hostility. The table could have seated 20. Tonight it held 9 of us, clustered at one end in a pool of guttering candlelight, the remainder of the room lost in shadow. So the meal was plain but competent: soup, fish, mutton, a savoury, and the conversation strained. Poirot made polite inquiries about the house, the coast, the village. The responses were minimal, as though by unspoken agreement the household had decided to reveal as little as possible. It was Miss Edith who shattered the fragile civility. She set down her soup spoon with a precise click and addressed Poirot directly. "You are here because of the curse, are you not, Monsieur Poirot?" The word fell into the conversation like a stone into still water. Gerald made a small sound of protest. Sylvia closed her eyes briefly. Philip gave a short, bitter laugh and reached for the wine. "I am here because your brother invited me, mademoiselle," Poirot replied evenly. "He expressed concerns about certain occurrences in this house. I'm investigating those occurrences." "Occurrences?" Miss Edith's lip curled. "How delicate. What is occurring, Monsieur Poirot, is what has occurred at Greave Hall for 400 years. The curse of Brother Anselm. The mourner walks, and the master of the house dies. It is documented. It is historical. It is inevitable." "Nothing is inevitable, mademoiselle, except perhaps the taxes of which your English politicians are so fond." "You may joke, Monsieur Poirot, but the dead do not jest. Philip has seen the mourner. 3 previous masters of Greave saw the mourner and died within the week. Gerald will be the 4th. "Edith, please." Gerald's voice was barely above a whisper. "The truth does not become less true for being unpleasant, Gerald. You should be making your peace with God, i.e. not consulting detectives." The silence that followed was painful. Dr. Frome cleared his throat and changed the subject to the weather forecast, with the determination of a man plugging a breach in a dam. The conversation limped onward, but the damage was done. The curse hung over the table like smoke, and no amount of small talk could dispel it. After dinner the women withdrew and the men sat over port in a silence that was more exhausting than conversation. Gerald excused himself early, pleading fatigue. Philip departed shortly after, taking the decanter with him. Dr. Frome announced he must return to the village despite the fog, patients to see in the morning, and left with a promise to return the following day. Teller murmured something about work in the library and drifted away, absorbed in thoughts that clearly had nothing to do with the company he was leaving. Poirot and I were left alone. "Well, Hastings, your impressions?" I considered. "Gerald is genuinely frightened. Philip is angry about something deeper than ghosts. Miss Edith is either a true believer or putting on a magnificent performance. Sylvia is holding herself together by willpower alone. Dr. Frome is concerned, but professional. Mrs. Roscoe is watching everyone and giving nothing away, and Teller seems to be in a world of his own. Admirable. You have observed well, and you have identified, without realizing it, the central difficulty of this case, which is that everyone in this house has a reason to wish Gerald Cavendish dead, and several of them have the means to accomplish it. The curse provides the perfect disguise. All that is needed is for Gerald to die in a manner consistent with the legend. A fall from the cliffs, a sudden illness, an accident in the fog. And everyone will nod wisely and say, "The curse," and ask no further questions. Then we must prevent it. We must do more than that, mon ami. We must expose the person behind the deception, because if we merely prevent one attempt, there will be another and another, until eventually they succeed. The only true protection for Gerald Cavendish is the arrest and conviction of whoever is trying to kill him. From somewhere deep within the house came a sound, a door closing perhaps, or a floorboard settling under invisible weight. In Greave Hall it was impossible to distinguish the natural complaints of an ancient building from something more deliberate. The fire crackled. The candles guttered. The portraits on the walls regarded us with their painted knowing eyes. "Come," Poirot said, rising. "We should retire. Tomorrow will be a day of much activity, and I require my rest, even if the sheets are damp." We climbed the stairs together, our candles casting wavering shadows on the walls. The staircase was steep and irregular, the carved figures on the balustrade leering at us as we passed. At the first floor landing, Poirot paused and gripped my arm. "Listen," he whispered. I listened. At first, nothing. Only the background symphony of the house, the wind, the distant sea. And then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of a bell. a single, deep note, rolling through the fog from somewhere beyond the house. It resonated in the stones in the chest. You are in some primitive part of the brain that recognised the sound as a summons, though to what I could not have said. The note hung in the air for what seemed an impossibly long time, then faded only to be repeated. And again, and again. Slow, measured, funereal. "The chapel bell," I breathed. "But you said the tower collapsed in 1780. There is no bell." "There is no bell that anyone has seen," Poirot corrected, "which is not the same thing. Come, Hastings, we must investigate." "Now? In this fog? The sound is occurring now. If we wish to discover its source, we must go now while it continues. Bring your torch and your revolver." We went. Chapter 2. The Bell and the Bones. The fog outside was a living thing. It pressed against us, filled our mouths and nostrils. I had reduced the world to a sphere of torchlight perhaps 5 feet in diameter, beyond which nothing existed. The cliff path was treacherous, slick with moisture, and I was acutely aware that somewhere to our right the land ended, and a sheer drop to the sea began. The bell continued to toll, slow, steady, mournful. But the fog played tricks with sound, seeming to move the source from one direction to another, so that at times it appeared to come from ahead, at times from behind, and once, disconcertingly, from directly beneath our feet. "Careful, Hastings," Poirot cautioned, and I realised I had strayed dangerously close to the path's edge. The ground here was soft and crumbling, the erosion that was slowly consuming Greave Hall's foundations evident even by torchlight. The ruins materialised from the fog with the sudden, dreamlike quality of an apparition. 3 walls still stood, or portions of them, rising like broken teeth against the darkness. The 4th had collapsed entirely, leaving a gap through which the fog poured like a slow invasion. Fallen stones lay everywhere, half buried in coarse grass, treacherous underfoot. The bell had stopped. We stood in the ruins, breathing hard, our torch beams cutting uselessly through the murk. The silence after the tolling was somehow worse than the sound itself, charged with expectation, as though something that had been summoned was now listening for us. "There is nothing here," I said at last, hearing the unsteadiness in my own voice and disliking it. "No bell, no mechanism. Nothing that could have made that sound." "On the contrary, mon ami," Poirot said softly, "there is everything here. The question is whether we have the eyes to see it." He moved forward carefully, testing each step before committing his weight. The ground within the ruins was uneven, littered with rubble and root systems. Poirot played his torch over the stones systematically with the patience and thoroughness I had come to expect from him. He examined the remnants of a Gothic arch, a section of carved stonework worn almost smooth by centuries of weather, the stubs of walls that had once enclosed a space of worship and now enclosed only fog and memory. Then he paused. "Hastings, bring your light here." Our 2 beams converged on a patch of ground near the base of the eastern wall. The earth here had been disturbed. Not obviously, whoever had done the work had taken care to conceal it, but Poirot's eyes, is trained over decades to notice the smallest deviation from order, detected it at once. The grass had been lifted and replaced. Small stones had been moved and repositioned, but not quite in their original configuration. A faint depression in the soil suggested something had been buried, and the earth had settled slightly over it. Poirot knelt, indifferent to the damp and the mud, and began to examine the area with his fingertips. His hands moved lightly, feeling rather than looking, and then he stopped. "There is a cavity here. Beneath the surface, something hollow. The crypt? Teller mentioned a crypt beneath the chapel. Perhaps, or perhaps something more recent." He rose and brushed at his knees with fastidious distaste. "Tomorrow, when it's light, we must return and excavate this spot. We must examine this place properly. But for now, we have learned what we came to learn." "Have we?" "I'm not sure we've learned anything except that this place is thoroughly unpleasant in the dark." We have learned that someone wished us to come here, Hastings. The bell was not random, it was timed. It rang after the household retired, when investigation would be conducted in darkness and fog, conditions that maximize fear and minimize useful observation. Someone wished to draw attention to these ruins while making examination as difficult as possible. Why? What did they wish us to see? Or more importantly, what did they wish us not to see? We made our way back to the house, following the cliff path with extreme care. The fog distorted everything: distance, direction, sound. Once I stopped abruptly, certain I had heard footsteps paralleling our own on a path I could not see. But there was nothing. Only the fog and the eternal assault of the sea on the cliffs below. Greave Hall, when we reached it, seemed almost welcoming by contrast, though the temperature within was scarcely warmer than without. We found the household dispersed, each member having retreated to their separate quarters, as though proximity to one another had become unbearable. Only Edmund Teller remained in the drawing-room, seated by the dying fire with a book open on his lap, though he did not appear to be reading. He looked up as we entered, and I noticed that his expression was alert, watchful, not at all the vague abstraction I had observed at dinner. "Did you find the source of the bell?" he asked. "We found the place from which it seemed to originate," Poirot said carefully. "Whether that is the same thing remains to be determined. Tell me, Monsieur Teller, you have made a study of this house and its history. Is there any record of a bell at the chapel within living memory?" Teller shook his head. "The tower collapsed in 1780 during a great storm. The records are quite specific. The fall took down most of the western wall as well, and the bell was destroyed. No one has heard it ring since." He paused, then added with a thin, humourless smile, "No one living, that is. Yet tonight we all heard something." "Yes, we did." Teller closed his book and set it aside. "Monsieur Poirot, I am a rational man. I have spent my life in the study of documented history, of facts that can be verified. I do not believe in ghosts. But I will tell you this. Greave Hall has defeated more rational men than I. There are sounds in this house that have no source, doors that open when no one is near them, cold spots that persist even in summer. I have tried to catalogue these phenomena, to find natural explanations. Sometimes I succeed, often I do not. And the mourner? You believe in him? I believe people see something. Whether it is a ghost, a trick of light, or a living person in disguise, I cannot say with certainty. But the sightings are remarkably consistent across centuries. Too consistent, I sometimes think, to be mere fancy." Poirot settled into his chair, arranging himself with precision. "Monsieur Teller, you are a man who values evidence. Let me present you with some. The monk's robe that appeared on the stairs this morning. You saw it." I had not yet heard about a monk's robe on the stairs, and my expression must have shown it. "Yesterday morning," Poirot explained for my benefit, "a monk's habit was discovered draped across the main staircase, as though an invisible figure had been ascending and had simply melted away, leaving only its garment behind. Miss Edith declared it a relic from the 16th century. I examined it closely." He turned back to Teller. "The fabric had been aged artificially. The stitching was done by machine. It is a costume, created perhaps within the last 50 years, certainly no earlier than the middle of the last century. This is fact, not conjecture." Teller was silent for a moment. Then, "You're saying someone placed it there deliberately, as part of a deception. That is one possibility. The other is that the robe itself is genuine as an object, a theatrical property perhaps, but that its appearance on the stairs was staged by human agency. Either way, we are dealing with a person, not a spirit. And the bell tonight? That is more complex. But consider, a bell is simply a tool for producing sound. There are many ways to produce sound. A recording, an instrument that mimics a bell, or even an actual bell, hidden and operated by a person who retrieves the mechanism before investigators arrive. You make it sound very simple. The principle is simple. The execution may be elaborate, but it can be done, and therefore it does not require a supernatural explanation, Teller rose. I hope you are right, Monsieur Poirot, because if you cannot prove it, if the supernatural explanation stands, then Gerald Cavendish will die within the week, and there will be nothing anyone can do to prevent it. He departed. I looked at Poirot. Cheery fellow. He is a man who has seen things he cannot explain, and it troubles him, as it should trouble any rational mind. But I, Hastings, have seen many things that appeared inexplicable, and all of them, without exception, proved to have explanations rooted firmly in human action. This will be no different. I hope you're right, because I must say, this house gives me the absolute creeps. Poirot smiled faintly. The house is designed to give you the creeps, mon ami. That is its purpose. Or rather, the purpose to which someone has bent it. They have used history, legend, and the natural discomforts of an ancient building to construct a theatre of fear. It is quite clever, but it is still theatre, and theatre requires actors, props, and a script. Our task is to discover who has written the script and who is performing it. We sat in silence for a moment, watching the embers. Then I asked, "What do we do tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we speak to the servants. They are the ones who see everything in a house, yet are rarely questioned by those who should know better. And then we return to the ruins in daylight and excavate that cavity I discovered. Something is hidden there, Hastings. Something important enough to disturb the earth for. When we find it, we shall understand a great deal more. And Gerald, do you truly think he's in danger?" Poirot's expression grew grave. "Oh, yes. Of that I have no doubt whatsoever. Someone in this house wishes him dead. Whether they will succeed depends entirely on how quickly we can penetrate their deception. The curse is a convenience, a ready-made explanation for murder. All that is required is for Gerald to die in a manner that appears consistent with the legend. A fall from the cliffs, a sudden illness, an accident in the night, and everyone will say, 'Ah yes, the curse,' and no one will look further. Then we must keep him safe. We must keep him aware. A man who believes he is cursed is a man who expects to die. He becomes careless, fatalistic. He may even assist in his own destruction without realizing it. We must counteract that belief. We must make him understand that this is murder, not magic, and murder can be prevented." The fire crackled. Somewhere in the depths of the house a door closed, or seemed to close. In Greave Hall, one could never be certain. Chapter 3. The testimony of those who served the morning brought no improvement in the weather. The fog had thickened during the night, pressing against the windows with such density that even the nearest outbuildings were invisible. I descended to breakfast at 8 o'clock, having passed a wretched night in my damp bed, waking repeatedly to sounds that might have been wind, footsteps, or the protestations of ancient timber, and found only Miss Edith in the breakfast parlour. She was eating toast with the methodical determination of someone performing an unpleasant duty. Her expression, already severe by nature, had acquired an additional layer of grim satisfaction, whereas as though the fog and the general misery of the household confirmed her world-view. "Good morning, Captain Hastings. I trust you slept well?" "Tolerably," I lied. "No one sleeps comfortably at Greave Hall. The house does not permit it." She spread marmalade with sharp, precise movements. "My brother has not yet come down, nor has his wife. Philip took a cup of black coffee an hour ago and departed for a walk despite the fog. He has always been reckless. Dr. Frome called early. He has a peculiar habit of arriving before one is ready to receive visitors, and is with Gerald in the study. Mrs. Roscoe and Mr. Teller have not been seen." "You're remarkably well informed, Miss Cavendish." "I make it my business to know what occurs in this house. Someone must maintain standards. It has fallen to me, as most disagreeable duties do." There was a wealth of bitterness in that simple statement. Before I could respond, Poirot entered, looking considerably more composed than I felt. The coffee at least was hot and strong, and he addressed himself to it with the satisfaction of a man who has found a small island of adequacy in a sea of discomfort. We were on our second cups when Mrs. Bell appeared to discuss the day's household matters with Miss Edith. Poirot seized the opportunity. "Madame Bell, when you have finished with Mademoiselle Cavendish, might you spare me a few minutes? I should like to understand the household arrangements more fully." The housekeeper's eyes flickered to Miss Edith, seeking permission. Miss Edith waved a dismissive hand. "Monsieur Poirot is investigating the disturbances. You may speak to him freely, though I doubt you will tell him anything of value. The servants see what they wish to see and ignore what frightens them." She swept out. I gave a low whistle. Charming woman. "She is a woman who believes she has been cheated by life," Poirot said, "and holds everyone responsible. It is a dangerous state of mind, Hastings. The resentful are capable of great harm." Mrs. Bell returned within the hour. Poirot had relocated us to the morning room with the functioning chimney, and the housekeeper entered with the careful dignity of a woman unaccustomed to being asked to sit in the presence of her betters. Poirot gestured to a chair, and she sat, though not comfortably, her hands folded in her lap, her posture upright. "Let us begin with practical matters," Poirot said. "How many staff are employed at Greave Hall?" "5 who live in, including myself, Tom Askew, the general man, driving, maintenance, heavy work, though the house defeats him as it defeats everyone. 2 housemaids, Jenny and Margaret, and the cook, Mrs. Phelps, who has been here 3 years and threatens to leave at the end of every month. No lady's maid for Madame Cavendish. Mrs. Cavendish brought a girl with her when she married. The girl lasted 6 weeks and left without notice. Since then, Jenny helps when needed. And staff from the village? A laundrywoman twice a week. A gardener when he can be persuaded, which isn't often. Mr. Gerald doesn't care for the grounds. Under Mr. Nathaniel, the gardens were beautiful. They've gone to ruin." Poirot made a note in his leather notebook. "Now, Madame Bell, the monk's robe that appeared on the stairs. You stated you had never seen it before." "You're absolutely certain?" Her jaw tightened. "I know every item in this house, sir, from the attics to the cellars. That robe was not here before yesterday morning." "Then someone brought it in from outside. Is it easy to enter Greave Hall unobserved?" A pause. "The house is not secure. Too many doors, too many windows. Some of the locks are medieval and barely function. A determined person could enter without much difficulty, particularly at night." "And the family? Do they move about the house after dark?" Another pause. Longer. Her hands tightened in her lap. "Young Mr. Philip does. I've heard him many nights. He walks the corridors when he's had too much to drink, which is often. Sometimes he goes out. I've heard the side door. Where he goes, I don't know and don't ask. And the others? Mr. Gerald suffers from insomnia. I found him in the library at 2 a.m, reading or simply sitting in the dark. Mrs. Cavendish keeps to her room. Miss Edith is a light sleeper and sometimes walks. Mrs. Roscoe has her own entrance to the east wing and comes and goes as she pleases. Mr. Teller works late in the library and sometimes falls asleep there. I found him at dawn, slumped over his books. A house in which half the occupants wandered at night was a house in which anyone might move about unobserved. It complicated matters considerably. "Tell me about Mr. Nathaniel Cavendish," Poirot said. "You were here when he died?" "I was." Her voice became carefully neutral. "Last December. A stroke, Dr. Frome said. He was at dinner, complained of a headache, and collapsed before the soup was finished. He died that night without regaining consciousness. And the mourner was seen before his death. Miss Edith says she saw a figure in the garden the evening before. I did not see it myself. But you believe she saw something. Miss Edith does not lie, sir. She's many things, but she's not a liar. If she says she saw a figure, then she saw a figure. Whether it was the mourner or someone dressed as the mourner, I could not say." "You're a sceptic, then?" Mrs. Bell met his gaze directly. "I am a practical woman. I have worked in this house for 12 years. I have heard the stories, and I have seen things I cannot explain. Doors opening by themselves, sounds in empty rooms, cold spots that remain cold when the fire is blazing. but I have also seen how people use those stories, how they frighten themselves and each other. How convenient it is to blame a curse rather than look for rational explanations. You are a woman after my own heart, Madame Bell. Tell me, in your professional opinion, are there secret passages in this house? I've heard the stories, same as everyone, but in 12 years I've never found one. The house is confusing enough without hidden passages, though I will say the cellars are more extensive than most people realise. There are chambers down there I've been in only once or twice. Mr. Teller has explored them more thoroughly than anyone. Looking for the entrance to the old crypt. So he says. He hasn't found it yet. Whether it still exists or was filled in centuries ago, no one knows. Poirot leaned forward slightly. One final question. In your observation of this household, do you believe someone wishes Mr. Gerald Cavendish dead? The housekeeper's expression did not change, but something flickered behind her eyes. That is a very direct question, sir. It requires a direct answer. She weighed her words. Mr. Gerald is not a beloved man. He is cold, tight with money, and indifferent to the feelings of those around him. His wife is unhappy. His son despises him. His sister resents him. But whether any of them would go so far as murder, I could not say. What I can tell you is that this house has changed since he inherited it. There is a tension now that was not present under Mr. Nathaniel, a sense of everyone waiting for something to happen. You are a woman of considerable perception. I am a woman who has survived 12 years at Greave Hall, sir. One does not survive here without learning to see clearly. The remaining interviews were conducted through the morning. Tom Askew, the general man, was taciturn and practical. The house was falling apart. Dangerous wiring, medieval plumbing, a roof that leaked in a dozen places, and the cliff eroding steadily beneath the east wing. Another decade and the whole thing would slide into the sea, and in his view, that would be no great loss. Did he believe in the curse? He shrugged. He'd seen things he couldn't explain. Lights in the chapel ruins when no one should be there. Sounds in the night. But he was a practical man. Old houses made noises. He'd believe in ghosts when one sat down and shared a pint with him. The housemaids, Jenny and Margaret, were young and frightened. They whispered, contradicted each other, agreed with each other, and offered little of substance. Yes, they'd heard the bell. No, they didn't know where it came from. Margaret thought she'd seen a figure in the corridor 3 nights ago. Jenny said it was a shadow. They were terrified of Miss Edith, pitied Mrs. Cavendish, avoided Philip when he'd been drinking, and considered Gerald a cold fish who never so much as said good morning. Mrs. Phelps, the cook, was a stout woman of 50 with opinions on everything and the confidence to express them. She'd been in service for 35 years and rated Greave Hall as adequate pay, terrible conditions and entirely too much drama. All this nonsense about curses and ghosts, she declared. Attention-seeking, if you ask me. People who haven't enough real problems inventing supernatural ones. I'll not say the house isn't peculiar. I've heard footsteps above the kitchen at dawn when I know no one's up. But footsteps are footsteps. They mean someone's walking, not that the dead have risen. Very sensible, Poirot agreed. Tell me, do you prepare meals for Mrs. Roscoe? She takes breakfast and lunch with the family when she's inclined, but she has a small kitchen in her wing, and often sees to her own supper. Independent sort of woman. I respect that. And Mr. Teller? He'd forget to eat entirely if I didn't remind him. I take a tray to the library and half the time find the last one still sitting there, cold and untouched. Scholars, she sniffed, live in their heads instead of the real world. By noon the interviews were complete. The fog showed no sign of lifting. Poirot and I took a cold luncheon in the breakfast parlour, and he reviewed his notes. What have we learned, Hastings? That no one much likes Gerald, that the house is falling apart, that everyone is frightened, and that people move about at night with remarkable freedom. Precisely. A house where multiple occupants wander after dark is a house where anyone might stage a manifestation without being observed. The conditions are perfect. Darkness, isolation, and the certainty of not being interrupted. He tapped his notebook. but something else troubles me. What? The servants are not lying, I'm certain of that. Mrs. Bell in particular is a woman of integrity, yet she speaks of things she cannot explain. Doors opening, sounds in empty rooms, cold spots. These are not the inventions of hysterical maids. Well, these are observations made by practical, level-headed people. You're not suggesting the place actually is haunted. I am suggesting that someone has gone to considerable trouble to make it appear haunted, and has been doing so for much longer than the past few days. These phenomena did not begin with Philip's sighting of the mourner. They have been building for months, perhaps years, creating an atmosphere, establishing a foundation, so that when the time came to exploit the legend for murder, the groundwork would already be laid. Good Lord, that would require extraordinary patience. Indeed, and it would require someone with long-term access to the house, someone who understands its rhythms, its weaknesses, its geography. He closed the notebook with a decisive snap. Come, Hastings, the fog has thinned slightly. We must return to the chapel ruins. There is digging to be done. Chapter 4. What the Earth Conceals. We equipped ourselves with torches, a small spade borrowed from Tom Askew's workshop, and stout coats, and set out along the cliff path. The fog had thinned enough to see perhaps 20 yards ahead, which was both a comfort and a revelation. A comfort because the path was no longer an exercise in blind faith, and a revelation because it showed, with pitiless clarity, just how close to the cliff edge the path ran. In places, no more than 4 feet of crumbling earth separated the track from a vertical drop to the rocks below. One stumble in the dark, one misstep in heavy fog, and a man would be dead before he knew he was falling. You see, Hastings, Poirot observed, gesturing toward the edge, how simple it would be. An evening walk in the fog, a cry perhaps, or perhaps no cry at all. The body discovered at the base of the cliffs the following morning, and everyone would say, "The curse." You think that's how they plan to do it? It is one possibility among several. The cliffs are the most convenient instrument of death available, but there are others. Poison, administered gradually to mimic illness. A fall on the stairs. Those stairs are treacherous, Hastings, and Gerald descends them alone every evening by candlelight. Or simply the accumulated effect of terror on a heart already under strain. Dr. Frome himself admitted that Gerald's heart is weakening. A sufficient shock, a manifestation more dramatic than anything yet attempted, might kill him without anyone having to lay a finger on him. At the ruins, Poirot knelt once more at the spot he had identified the previous night. In daylight the disturbance of the earth was more evident. I required no instruction, and began to dig carefully with the spade while Poirot directed operations with the focused intensity of an archaeologist supervising an excavation. 6 inches down, the spade struck something solid. "Careful," Poirot cautioned. "Very careful, mon ami." I scraped away the remaining soil with my hands. A wooden surface emerged, a box of plain deal wood, perhaps 18 inches square, relatively new. The lid was not nailed, but fitted snugly. I worked it free and lifted it. Inside, packed in oilcloth, was a handbell. It was brass, tarnished but substantial, perhaps 8 inches high. The clapper had been wrapped in cloth to muffle any inadvertent sound during transport. So beneath the bell was a mechanical device of some ingenuity, a clockwork mechanism attached to a striking arm, the sort of thing one might find in a mantel clock, adapted to a different purpose. Poirot examined it with intense concentration, touching nothing but observing everything. Voila! Our ghost bell. A timing device, Hastings, set to ring at a predetermined hour. The bell is positioned, the mechanism activated, and the operator can be elsewhere, perhaps even sitting in the drawing room with witnesses, when the bell rings. Afterwards one returns, retrieves the mechanism and buries it. Who would think to dig in an overgrown ruin? But Poirot, the sound last night was enormous, much louder than this bell could produce. Was it? Or did the fog, the acoustics of the ruins and our own expectation make it seem so? Sound behaves strangely on these cliffs. It echoes off the rock face, amplifies in the natural bowl of the ruins, distorts in the fog. A single bell, ringing in this acoustic chamber, could easily sound like something far larger and more distant. Our minds, primed by legend, did the rest. I sat back on my heels staring at the mechanism. Then it's all trickery. All of it. The bell certainly. But there are other elements we have not yet explained. The robe on the stairs. The figure Philip saw on the cliff path. These require more than a buried mechanism. They require a person. Someone who moves through this landscape at night, who knows when they will be observed and when they are safe. Someone who is not afraid of the dark, the cliffs, or the legend they are exploiting. The sound behind us made both of us turn sharply. Philip Cavendish stood at the edge of the ruins, his face pale beneath the rawness that the wind had put there, his hands thrust deep into his coat pockets. He looked at the excavation, at the bell in its box, and at us. "So you found it," he said quietly. "I wondered if you would." Poirot rose slowly, his eyes never leaving the young man's face. "You knew this was here?" "I suspected. I've been watching. I knew someone was coming here at night. I followed them once, about a week ago, but I lost them in the fog. When I came back the next morning, the earth looked disturbed. I didn't know what it meant. I'm not a detective." "You followed them, but you mentioned this to no one?" Philip's laugh was bitter. "Mentioned it to whom? My father, who already thinks I'm unstable? The servants? Who would simply add it to their catalogue of my failings? Perhaps Miss Edith, who would declare it further proof of the curse and my imminent damnation. You might have mentioned it to Monsieur Poirot," I pointed out. "I wasn't certain what I'd seen, and I didn't want to believe it. Because if someone is staging these manifestations, then one of us, one of the people in that house, is trying to kill my father. And despite everything between us, I don't want that to be true." Poirot gestured toward the path back to the house. "Walk with us, Monsieur Philip. Tell me exactly what you observed." We walked three abreast, Philip between us, speaking in a low voice that barely carried over the sound of the sea. He had been unable to sleep, a common occurrence, he admitted without embarrassment. He had taken to walking at night, on along the cliffs, indifferent to the weather and the danger. 8 days ago he had seen a light near the ruins. Not a torch beam, but something softer. A lantern, perhaps, or a candle in a shielded holder. I called out, but whoever it was didn't respond. I made for the light, but the fog was impenetrable. By the time I reached the ruins, the light had gone. There was no one, no sign of anyone, just the wind and the stones. "Did you recognize anything about the figure? Height? Build? The way they moved?" "The fog was too thick. I saw the light, nothing more. Though I had the impression, just an impression, that they knew I was there. The light went out very suddenly, as though they'd spotted me and deliberately extinguished it." We had reached the house. In the entrance hall we encountered Mrs. Roscoe descending the stairs, undressed for the outdoors in a coat of dark wool. She paused when she saw us, her gaze moving from Poirot's muddy knees to my grimy hands to Philip's haggard face. "You have been excavating, Monsieur Poirot. Have you unearthed the bones of Brother Anselm, or merely the remains of someone's reputation?" "Neither, madame. Only a piece of stage machinery. The bell we heard last night was entirely mechanical." Her expression was unreadable. How disappointing. One always hopes for mystery and finds clockwork instead. She adjusted her gloves. "Tell me, does the discovery of one trick prove that all are tricks? Or might some manifestations be genuine while others are counterfeit?" "A valid distinction," Poirot acknowledged. "One must consider that the false may be used to disguise the true, or the true to lend credibility to the false. Then consider this." Mrs. Roscoe's voice was calm, measured. "Gerald Cavendish is a man who has made himself hated. He inherited wealth he did not earn, authority he does not deserve, and a house that despises him as thoroughly as any of us do. If the curse is real, it could not have chosen a more appropriate victim. And if it is not real, if someone is engineering his death, I doubt you will find anyone willing to stop them." She swept past us and out the front door. I exhaled. Good Lord, she practically confessed to conspiracy. She expressed an opinion, Hastings, not the same thing, though it is useful to know she would not grieve at Gerald's death. Poirot lost no time in presenting his findings to Gerald and Dr. Frome, who were still closeted together in the study. And Gerald received the news of the bell mechanism with an expression that was painful to observe, a fragile, trembling hope breaking through the mask of despair, like a green shoot pushing through cracked earth. Then it was not supernatural. The bell was a device. Precisely. Someone wished you to believe in the curse. Someone with knowledge of mechanics and access to the chapel ruins. But who? Who would go to such lengths? That is what I intend to discover, but the discovery proves an essential point. What appears supernatural may be entirely mundane, and if the bell was trickery, what else might be? Dr. Frome had been listening with his fingers steepled. The robe on the stairs. Stage dressing, artificially aged, machine-stitched. And the figure Philip saw? That remains unexplained. But consider, monsieur, Philip saw a figure at dusk in poor light in fog. Could it not have been someone he knows, dressed to appear as the mourner? But where did they go? Philip interjected. I followed and there was nothing, no one. The figure might have entered the ruins and concealed themselves, or continued along the cliff path while you searched. You assumed they had vanished because you could not find them, but perhaps they simply walked away. Gerald stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. Then I am still in danger, despite the bell being exposed? I fear so, more so in fact. How can that be? Poirot's expression was grave. Because whoever is behind this now knows I have found their mechanism. They will realise their supernatural disguise is compromised. They must act quickly before I can expose them entirely. A cornered conspirator, Monsieur Cavendish, is more dangerous than a confident one. Gerald sank back into his chair. What am I to do? You are to continue living, conduct yourself normally, take reasonable precautions, and trust that Hercule Poirot will not permit a murder to occur under his very nose. I have my professional pride, you understand. It would be most inconvenient to my reputation. Chapter 5. The Watcher in the Fog. The afternoon was devoted to what Poirot called the geography of guilt, understanding who had access to which spaces, when, and under what circumstances. It was unglamorous work, but essential. With me as his note-taker, he mapped the house both physically and socially. The east wing, where Mrs. Roscoe had her rooms, possessed its own entrance, reached by a path that branched from the main drive. Her quarters were on the first floor, accessible by a separate staircase that did not connect to the main house, until the corridor outside the library. She could come and go unobserved by anyone. When Poirot requested access to her rooms, she granted it with surprising grace. I have nothing to hide, though I doubt you'll find anything more incriminating than an untidy writing desk and rather too many novels. Her quarters proved comfortable, even elegant, furnished with pieces that were clearly her own rather than the house's dreary cast-offs. Books lined every surface. The writing desk was indeed untidy, covered with correspondence and what appeared to be the draft of a manuscript. "You're a writer, madam, an aspiring one. I write about what I know. Widowhood, the navigation of society, the curious position of women who are neither young nor old, neither wealthy nor poor." She watched him examine the room with apparent unconcern. "You're searching for something specific? A monk's habit in the wardrobe? A mechanical bell under the bed?" But there was no incriminating evidence. No tools, no fabric, no oil beyond the lamp on her bedside table. Either she was innocent or she was exceptionally careful. As we left, she spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "The interesting thing about curses, Monsieur Poirot, is that they function whether they are real or not. Gerald believes he is cursed. That belief is destroying him. In a sense, Brother Anselm has already won. The fear is real, and fear can kill as surely as poison." Edmund Teller's domain in the library proved far more interesting. Though he had colonised one end of the long room entirely, creating a scholar's warren of books, papers, maps, and artifacts. When we entered, he was bent over a parchment, making notes in a hand so small it was nearly illegible. He looked up, blinking. "Monsieur Poirot, come in. You'll forgive me if I don't rise. I'm at a rather crucial point." His work was impressive. He had assembled what amounted to a complete archive of Greave Hall's history, from medieval charters to Victorian household accounts. Every document was catalogued, cross-referenced, annotated. It was the work of years. I wandered the perimeter of his workspace and paused at a table bearing architectural drawings. "These are plans of the house?" "Original plans, some of them," Teller said without looking up. The difficulty is that Greave Hall was built in stages over 7 centuries. No single plan captures the whole. One must layer them, like geological strata." Poirot joined me, examining the drawings. "And you have found the entrance to the crypt?" Now Teller did look up, his expression keen. "Not yet, but I'm close. There are references in the account books from the 1540s to payments for sealing the chapel undercroft. That suggests the crypt was deliberately closed, probably after Brother Anselm's burial. The question is where the entrance was." Poirot picked up a small tool from the workbench, a delicate instrument of brass and steel. "You have mechanical skills, Monsieur Teller. Enough to repair the old mechanisms one encounters in a house like this, clocks, door hardware. The contraption that raises the chandelier for cleaning. I'm no engineer, but I can manage simple clockwork." "Then you could construct a device such as the bell mechanism we discovered this morning?" Teller set down his pen with care. "I could have. I did not, but I could have." "You do not ask why I inquire." "I am not a fool, Monsieur Poirot. Someone is staging manifestations. A mechanical bell is precisely the sort of device such a person would employ. You suspect everyone, and I am part of everyone. I don't resent the suspicion. I would be disappointed if you didn't suspect me. You are remarkably composed. I am a scholar. We deal in evidence. Provide evidence that I am responsible, and I will accept the consequences. Until then, suspicion is merely a hypothesis awaiting verification." Poirot smiled. "You would make an excellent detective. I am a detective in my way. I investigate the past rather than the present. The methods are not so different." As we were leaving, Poirot asked one more question. "You have lived in this house for 3 years. Have you observed anything you cannot explain rationally?" Teller removed his spectacles and polished them, a delaying gesture I recognised, buying time to frame his answer. "I am a rational man. My professional life is built upon evidence and verifiable fact, so it troubles me to admit that yes, I have experienced things that resist rational explanation." He described hearing footsteps in the corridor outside the library, past midnight, on multiple occasions. Each time he opened the door, the corridor was empty and unnaturally cold, even in summer. The phenomenon was consistent, unrepeatable, and he had no explanation for it. "I told no one," he added. "What would I say, that I hear ghost footsteps? I have my scholarly reputation to consider." After we left the library, I voiced what Poirot was surely thinking. That's 3 separate people. Teller, Mrs. Bell, and Margaret the maid, who report sounds and sensations they can't explain. Surely they can't all be in league. A conspiracy of that complexity seems improbable. No, I think we must accept that some phenomena in this house are genuine manifestations of age, unstable foundations, and centuries of accumulated peculiarity. The question is which are natural, which are staged, and which are being deliberately misinterpreted. It was then that Sylvia Cavendish intercepted us. She had been waiting in the corridor, positioned where she could watch in both directions. Her face was drawn, her manner agitated. "Monsieur Poirot, I must speak with you, privately." I withdrew tactfully. When Poirot found me 20 minutes later, his expression was grave. "Sylvia has told me something important. The inheritance was contested. Philip believed he should have been Nathaniel's heir. They were close, much closer than Nathaniel and Gerald. When the will left everything to Gerald, Philip accused his father of exercising undue influence during Nathaniel's final illness. There was talk of a legal challenge, but none was made. Gerald offered Philip an allowance, generous enough to make litigation pointless but structured, so that Philip remains financially dependent. If he challenges the will, the allowance ceases. Effective blackmail. And Sylvia told you this because 3 days before Philip saw the mourner, father and son had a terrible argument. Philip accused Gerald of stealing his inheritance. Gerald responded that Philip had squandered every opportunity and deserved nothing, and Philip said, these are Sylvia's words, that he wished Gerald were dead. I absorbed this in silence. There is something else, Poirot continued, something no one told me, which I find very interesting indeed. Philip's mother, Gerald's first wife, died when Philip was 12. She walked into the sea one winter morning and didn't come back. Philip was the one who found her body on the rocks. Suicide. The family called it an accident. Philip told you on your walk yesterday. Yes. I asked him to walk with you precisely because I suspected he would confide in a sympathetic listener that the house killed her. His exact words were, "This house killed her. Same as it'll kill father. Same as it'll kill all of us if we're fool enough to stay." Poor devil. Indeed. But consider the implications. A young man with a dead mother, a cold father, a stolen inheritance, and an expressed wish for that father's death. If someone wished to frame Philip for Gerald's murder, they could hardly have found a more convincing suspect. You think he's being set up? I think it is a possibility we must consider very seriously. Before Poirot could elaborate, there was a commotion from the upper floor. A woman's voice, sharp with alarm. We took the stairs quickly and found Mrs. Bell outside Miss Edith's room, her face pale. She won't answer. The door's locked from inside. I knocked and knocked. Gerald appeared dishevelled from his afternoon rest. Break it down. Allow me first to try reason, Poirot said, and knocked firmly. Miss Cavendish, it is Hercule Poirot. Please open the door. Silence. Then faintly a rustling from within. The lock turned. The door opened a few inches. Miss Edith looked out, her face composed but her eyes strange, unfocused. I am perfectly well. I was resting. You didn't answer Mrs. Bell's knocking. I was deeply asleep. It is no one's concern but my own. She moved to close the door, but Poirot's keen eyes had caught something, a dampness on the hem of her black dress, and clinging to the fabric, tiny fragments of what might have been seaweed or coastal vegetation. The door closed. The lock turned. I waited until we were out of earshot. She's been outside, Poirot. The hem of her dress, did you see? I saw. She has been outside, and she lied about it. The question is where and why. She did not leave by any entrance observed by the household, which means she used a route that no one saw. A secret way? A possibility that grows more probable by the hour. Come, Hastings. Before dinner we must revisit the cellars. Chapter 6. The Secret Passage. The cellars of Greave Hall were as chaotic and layered as the house above them. Some chambers were brick-vaulted, relatively modern additions from the Georgian era. Others were hewn directly from the living rock, primitive and ancient, their walls running with moisture. The air grew colder the deeper we ventured, alarmed, and the sound of the sea became a vibration felt in the bones rather than heard with the ears. Tom Askew was at work in one of the storage chambers, repairing a collapsed shelf. He looked up as we descended. "Help you with something, sir?" "I am exploring, with Mr. Cavendish's permission. These cellars are extensive. More than anyone knows. Some parts I've never been in myself, blocked off, or the ceiling's too dangerous. The whole seaward side is sinking toward the cliff, slow but steady. You've worked here long?" 6 years. Since old Mr. Nathaniel's time. He was a proper gentleman. Paid fair, treated folk decent. He caught himself. Mr. Gerald pays what's owed. That's all a man can expect. But the hesitation spoke volumes. I followed Poirot deeper into the maze of passages, leaving Askew to his repairs, and Poirot found what he was looking for in a chamber that served no current purpose. The walls were bare stone, the ceiling so low that even Poirot, not a tall man, had to stoop. Against the far wall, barely visible in the torchlight, was brickwork that did not match the surrounding stone. The mortar was relatively fresh. He rapped his knuckles against it. The sound was hollow. "Behind this wall is space," he said. "Possibly significant space." Together we examined the brickwork. It was crude, functional, intended to seal rather than to beautify. And at a specific point when Poirot pressed against it, there was movement, slight but definite. We applied pressure. The brickwork swung inward on a crude pivot, revealing darkness beyond and a draught of air that smelled of sea and stone and something far older than either. Poirot played his torch into the opening. A passage roughly hewn from the rock descended at a shallow angle. The walls glistened with moisture. The floor was worn smooth by centuries of feet, or perhaps by water erosion. It was impossible to tell. "We're going in, aren't we?" I said with resignation. "But naturally, would you prefer to wait here?" "Absolutely not. If you fall through rotten flooring into the sea, someone ought to be present to describe how it happened." The passage was tall enough to walk upright, but narrow enough that we had to proceed in single file. The floor was slick with damp. The sound of the sea grew louder as we descended, a rhythmic booming that suggested we were approaching the cliff face. After perhaps 50 yards, the passage opened into a chamber. Not large, but unmistakably man-made, with a vaulted ceiling and carved stone pillars. Against the far wall were stone shelves, and on these shelves, arranged with monastic order, were human remains. Dozens of skeletons carefully laid out, each positioned as though in repose. Some still had fragments of cloth clinging to them, some were complete, others fragmentary. All were undeniably ancient. "The crypt," I breathed. "My God, Poirot, we've found it." Poirot moved among the remains with respectful care, examining without touching. "The burial place of the monks of Greave. And there," he indicated a shelf where bones had clearly been disturbed, several removed, leaving gaps in the orderly arrangement, "is where certain remains have been taken. Recently, the dust has been disturbed and there are footprints." He knelt to examine the floor more closely. 2 different sets of prints, one larger, one smaller, both wearing boots. Both have been here multiple times. The tracks overlap. 2 people? So it would appear, which complicates matters considerably. I had been working on the assumption of a single conspirator. 2 changes the calculus. Beyond the crypt, the passage continued, ascending now. The construction changed. Tudor-era brick replaced medieval stone. After another 30 yards, we found a door. Wooden, heavily aged but solid. It was unlocked. Poirot opened it with care. Beyond was a cellar chamber, but this one was furnished. A workbench, tools, cans of paint and varnish, bolts of cloth in dark brown and black, and hanging on pegs along one wall 3 monks' habits in varying states of completion. "A workshop," I muttered. Someone's been making these costumes down here." Poirot examined everything without touching. "One is genuinely old, salvaged from the crypt or the house's stores. The other 2 are forgeries, created to appear ancient. The staining, the artificial wear patterns, all deliberate." He indicated the workbench. "Tea for staining fabric, sandpaper for simulating age, paraffin for the lantern that Philip saw." On the workbench was a notebook, its pages covered in cramped handwriting. Poirot opened it carefully and read aloud. "Monday 3 p.m. GC in study, door closed, SC in garden, PC absent, presumed village, Edith in room, Mr. taking tea, EF not present. Duration of privacy, 40 minutes, sufficient for chapel placement." He looked at me. "A log of the household's movements, Hastings. Someone has been watching, recording. It was planning every manifestation down to the minute. But whose handwriting? That I cannot immediately determine. The writing is deliberately cramped, possibly disguised. But I know someone who might identify it. The writer himself, if confronted, For now, he pocketed the notebook carefully. Let us see where this passage leads. The workshop connected to a short flight of stairs and another door. This one opened into a space I recognised from our earlier exploration. The coal cellar beneath the east wing, accessible from both inside the house and from an exterior hatch that opened onto the grounds. So that is the method, Poirot murmured. Enter through the coal cellar hatch, or from the house itself through the cellar stairs. Traverse the passage to the crypt. Remove bones. Proceed through the passage to an exit near the ruins, which we have not yet found from outside but which must exist. Arrange the theatrical display. Return the same way. No crossing the open grounds. No risk of being observed. But the passage exit near the ruins? We didn't see one. Because it is concealed by the tumbled stones. We shall find it. But first, Hastings, dinner, and then, I think, a revelation. We emerged from the coal cellar into the kitchen corridor, filthy with coal dust and cobwebs. Mrs. Bell nearly dropped a tray at the sight of us. Lord save us, what have you gentlemen been doing? Investigating, Poirot said, with as much dignity as a man covered in coal dust can muster. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. Everyone was present except Teller, who had sent word that his research was at a crucial juncture. The fog had thickened again. The candles guttered despite no detectable draught. Gerald ate nothing. Sylvia made valiant attempts at brightness that rang false. Philip drank with steady determination. Mrs. Roscoe watched everyone with the detached interest of a naturalist observing specimens. Dr. Frome contributed observations about the importance of regular meals, which were politely ignored. Miss Edith ate with mechanical precision, her manner suggesting that the household was a comprehensive disappointment to civilized standards. It was as the covers were being cleared that Mrs. Bell entered, her face stricken. "Begging your pardon, but Tom Askew has found something at the chapel ruins. He says you'd best come quickly." We went in a group, as Gerald insisting despite all protests. The fog transformed the familiar path into an alien landscape. Askew waited at the ruins, his torch a wavering point of light. He gestured wordlessly at something on the ground. A monk's robe spread on the stones, positioned as though framing an invisible figure, hood arranged, sleeves extended. But this one was not empty. Within the robe, arranged with grotesque care, were bones. A human skull, arm bones, ribs. Not a complete skeleton, but enough to suggest one. Sylvia turned away with a small sound of distress. Philip swore viciously. Gerald stood frozen, the colour draining from his face as though someone had opened a tap. Dr. Frome knelt beside the remains, his professional instinct overriding shock. "Very old," he said, examining them without touching. "Centuries old. No signs of recent trauma. These are archaeological remains." "From the crypt," Miss Edith said, and there was something in her voice, a strange, nearly triumphant certainty, that chilled me more than the fog. Someone has opened the crypt and removed Brother Anselm's remains. The curse reaches its climax. Gerald, you have perhaps 2 days. "How can you possibly know these are Brother Anselm's?" I demanded. "Who else would be buried beneath this chapel?" Poirot had been studying the ground. Now he rose. "These bones were not here this morning. When Hastings and I examined this site, this area was undisturbed. Someone placed them here within the last 12 hours. "Placed them?" Gerald's voice was barely audible. "Bones do not walk from crypts to cliff tops of their own volition. Someone transported them, arranged them, and wishes you to see them. But why? To prepare the household for your death, to make it seem so inevitable that when it occurs it will be accepted rather than investigated." Mrs. Roscoe spoke from the edge of the group. "Monsieur Poirot, answer me this. How did someone remove bones from a sealed crypt that no one has been able to locate? And how did they transport them here without being seen?" "Those are precisely the questions I intend to answer," Poirot said, "and I shall answer them very soon. But first, we must secure this scene. He posted askew as guard, and we returned to the house. The atmosphere was that of a siege, windows dark, fog pressing in, and somewhere within these walls a murderer waiting for the moment to strike. Chapter 7. The Man in the Passage. That evening, Poirot assembled the household in the drawing room and made his announcements. He described the passage connecting the cellars to the crypt, the workshop where costumes and effects had been manufactured, and the notebook documenting the household's movements. He revealed these facts methodically, without drama, watching each face with the unblinking attention of a man reading a complex document for hidden meaning. The reactions were instructive. Gerald's fragile hopes solidified slightly. Here was proof that human hands, not supernatural forces, were at work. Sylvia gripped her husband's arm, her face pale but resolute. Philip straightened in his chair, his habitual drunken slouch replaced by something sharper, more alert. Dr. Frome listened with professional gravity, his fingers steepled, his grey eyes moving from speaker to speaker. Miss Edith rose to her feet, her face rigid. "This is absurdity. You claim to have found secret passages and workshops, yet you offer no independent verification. How convenient that these discoveries were made when no witnesses were present." "An excellent point, mademoiselle, which is why, tomorrow morning in daylight and with the full household present, we shall conduct a complete tour so that everyone may see for themselves." "You think we are in danger tonight?" Philip asked, and the belligerence had left his voice, replaced by something younger and more uncertain. "I think a person capable of such patience and elaborate planning is not someone to be taken lightly. I advise everyone to remain in their rooms tonight with doors locked." Mrs. Roscoe had been silent throughout. Now she spoke. "And what of Edmund?" "He has not appeared all day." I'd nearly forgotten. "Teller isn't in the library," I reported. "His papers are there, his spectacles on the desk, but there's no sign of the man himself. I checked the obvious rooms. He's nowhere." A ripple of unease passed through the assembly. "How long has he been missing?" Mrs. Roscoe asked, and for the first time her composure showed cracks. "That depends on when he was last seen. Miss Edith." I assumed he was working. I did not actually verify his presence. "Then he could have left the library at any time this afternoon." Poirot's expression was calm, but I knew him well enough to recognise the tension beneath. Teller's absence, combined with the discoveries in the passage, suggested something more serious than scholarly distraction. A search party was organised, and Gerald insisted on participating despite Sylvia's protests. Dr. Frome came with his medical bag, that eternal companion. Philip volunteered with the air of a man seeking distraction from his thoughts. We left the women in the drawing room with instructions to lock the door and open it for no one but us. The fog was thick, our torches nearly useless. We checked the chapel ruins first. Askew, still faithfully at his post, had seen no one. Then Poirot made his decision. "The passage," he said. "If Teller is anywhere, he is there." We returned to the house, descended to the cellars, and navigated the now familiar maze to the concealed entrance. Poirot went first, with me close behind. The passage was damp and close, the air heavy with the smell of stone and sea. We reached the crypt without incident. Poirot raised a hand for silence and listened. From somewhere ahead came a sound, rhythmic scraping and harsh, laboured breathing. He extinguished his torch and motioned for us to do the same. In the darkness, the sounds became clearer. From the workshop, a faint glow was visible, candlelight flickering. Poirot advanced with extreme care. We reached the workshop entrance and looked inside. Edmund Teller knelt before the workbench, his back to us. He was burning papers in a metal basin, feeding documents one by one into the flames with methodical haste. A pile of notebooks and correspondence waited beside him, and he worked through them with the grim efficiency of a man destroying evidence against a deadline. "Monsieur Teller," Poirot said quietly, "I think perhaps you should stop what you're doing." Teller spun, his face a mask of shock that rapidly transformed into calculation. For a moment I tensed, my hand on my revolver, but there was nowhere for him to go. Every exit led past us. Slowly Teller raised his hands. "I suppose you have questions." Many, but let us conduct our conversation above ground, in comfort, and before witnesses. He made no resistance as we escorted him through the passage and back to the surface. The household's confusion at seeing our scholarly friend in custody, blackened with soot, reeking of burnt paper, was considerable. We assembled in the drawing-room. Teller sat in a chair by the fire, looking neither defiant nor ashamed, but simply weary, like a man who has carried a heavy weight for a long time and has finally set it down. The household arranged itself round the room, a natural courtroom forming itself from the geometry of shock and suspicion. Mrs. Roscoe, I noticed, had positioned herself as far from Teller as the room allowed. Poirot stood before the fireplace. "Monsieur Teller, let us begin with what I know. You have been using the passage system to access the chapel ruins and the surrounding cliffs. You constructed the bell mechanism. You manufactured the monk's habits in the workshop. You removed bones from the crypt and arranged them at the ruins. You have been systematically creating the impression that the curse of Brother Anselm is manifesting, all calculated to terrify Gerald Cavendish into leaving this house." The silence was absolute. Gerald had gone grey. Sylvia gripped his hand. Philip stared at Teller with dawning fury. Teller was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're substantially correct, Monsieur Poirot. With one important exception. I never intended to murder anyone." "Then explain what you did intend." Teller removed his spectacles, polished them with that habitual delaying gesture, and replaced them. He told his story. The discovery of the passage and crypt, Nathaniel's enthusiasm, Gerald's indifference, the threatened sealing of the passages, the looming destruction of irreplaceable historical treasures. He had decided to use the legend to make Greave Hall intolerable for Gerald, frighten him into leaving, selling, handing the house to someone who would preserve what it contained. The bell, the robe, the bones, they were pressure, not precursors to murder. I wanted Gerald gone. I did not want him dead. And the mourner on the cliff path? That was me. Hey, Philip was supposed to be in the village that evening. My log said he always went on Tuesdays, but he came back early and I was already on the path. I had no choice but to trust the fog. Where did you go when he followed? Into the passage exit near the ruins. It's concealed by fallen stones. I waited until he left. Philip made a strangled sound. 3 weeks I've been questioning my own sanity because of you. I didn't intend for you to see me. I'm sorry for it. Poirot nodded slowly. A comprehensive explanation, but incomplete. The footprints in the crypt, 2 sets. You had an accomplice. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Teller's composure, maintained through everything, cracked. "I worked alone," he said. "You did not. The evidence is unambiguous. 2 people have traversed the passage. And the observation log records movements that could only have been noted from within the house, while you were in the passages below. You had a partner." Every eye moved to Miss Edith Cavendish. She sat very still, her black dress seeming to absorb the firelight. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I did what was necessary to protect this house," Gerald whispered. "Edith? You intended to destroy it, Gerald. You said as much. Sell the contents, let the building decay, move to London with the proceeds. This house has stood for 700 years. I will not permit it to be sacrificed to your indifference. So you conspired with Teller to drive me away, to terrify me out of my own home. To terrify you out of a house you never wanted and do not deserve. Yes." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Poirot raised a hand. "We now have the outline, but we do not yet have the whole truth." Chapter 8. The second plot. "What remains unexplained?" Teller asked, and beneath his composure I detected genuine unease. "Several things," Poirot said, beginning to pace. "First, the death of Nathaniel Cavendish." Gerald stirred. "Nathaniel died of a stroke. Dr. Frome certified it. And I do not dispute the medical finding, at this moment, but consider the timing. Nathaniel died in December. Miss Edith saw the mourner the evening before his death. At that time, Monsieur Teller, had you begun your campaign? Teller went very still. No. Nathaniel's death predated it by months. Then who was the mourner that Miss Edith saw before Nathaniel's death? The question detonated silently. If Teller was not performing as the mourner before Nathaniel died, someone else was, and that someone had a different purpose entirely. Poirot turned to Frome. Doctor, you certified Nathaniel's death. Were there any unusual circumstances? A stroke is not unusual in a man of 72. The collapse was sudden, the symptoms consistent. I had no reason to suspect otherwise. But if I were to suggest the stroke might have been induced, certain substances perhaps. Frome shifted. Digitalis in excessive doses, certain alkaloids, aconitine, which can cause cardiac arrest mimicking a stroke. He paused. But I performed the examination carefully, and yet no post-mortem was ordered. There was no reason. The family did not request one. Was it the family who declined? Or one person specifically? Frome's eyes moved involuntarily to Mrs. Roscoe. Then he caught himself and looked away. Mrs. Roscoe spoke with controlled calm. When Dr. Frome suggested a post-mortem as formality, I said Nathaniel would not have wanted it. He believed in dignity after death. And you accepted this, Doctor? She was his closest companion. She had nursed him through his final illness. I had no reason to overrule her. Poirot turned to Mrs. Roscoe. You were very close to Nathaniel. We were lovers, she said simply. He was a widower. I was a widow. We found comfort in each other. And after his death, you remained. Under what arrangement? A codicil to his will grants me the use of the East Wing for my lifetime. Gerald has challenged it, but the codicil is legally sound. Poirot studied her, then changed direction. Let me present what I believe to be the true situation. Teller and Miss Edith staged manifestations to frighten Gerald into leaving. This I accept. But beneath their campaign there is a second, more dangerous plot, one that predates their efforts and has used them as unwitting cover. A second plot. Gerald looked bewildered. The mourner was seen before Nathaniel's death, before Teller began his campaign. That sighting was not Teller's work. It was staged by someone else, someone who wanted Nathaniel dead, and that same person is now planning to kill you, Gerald. But who? That is what we must determine tonight, because I believe the murderer, seeing Teller exposed, will accelerate their plans. Every layer of concealment is being stripped away. They must act now, or not at all. I felt my hand move to my revolver. Poirot noticed and nodded. What do you propose? Dr. Frome asked. A trap. Gerald will retire to his room as usual. The door will be locked. Hastings will be inside, armed. I will be in the corridor outside. Everyone else will be confined to their rooms. If the murderer makes their move tonight, we will be waiting. Gerald's face was pale but resolute. And if they don't? Then we continue until they do. But I do not think we shall wait long. The pressure is too great. Teller's exposure has forced the true conspirator's hand. They cannot afford patience any longer. The arrangements were made. As the household dispersed to their assigned positions, Poirot drew me aside. Hastings, I must tell you what I suspect. But I must also tell you that I am not yet certain, and an accusation without proof is worse than useless. Who is it? Watch the corridor tonight. Watch who comes, and keep your revolver ready. You know who it is. I believe I know, but belief is not knowledge. Tonight we shall have knowledge. I looked at my friend, at the sharp green eyes, the magnificent moustaches, the small, precise figure that contained one of the most formidable minds in Europe, and I felt the familiar mixture of admiration and exasperation that Hercule Poirot so reliably inspired. Very well, I said. I'll watch, and I'll be ready. Bon, then let us set our trap and see what manner of creature it catches. Chapter 9. The Trap. The household dispersed with the brittle, easy mechanical compliance of people who have been told something terrible is about to happen, and have no choice but to obey the one person who seems to understand it. Teller and Miss Edith were confined to separate rooms, each locked from the outside, a precaution Teller accepted with the resignation of a man who recognises that his own choices have brought him to this point, and which Miss Edith endured with a furious silent dignity that was more unnerving than protest would have been. Philip was given the room adjacent to his father's, with instructions to lock the door and open it for no one but Poirot or myself. He accepted the revolver I offered him. I had a second, smaller weapon in my luggage, with a competence that surprised me. "I was in the OTC at school," he said, checking the cylinder with practised ease. I'm not entirely useless, Captain Hastings, despite appearances." Sylvia insisted on remaining with Gerald, and Poirot, after brief consideration, permitted it. Mrs. Roscoe retired to the East Wing, and Dr. Frome, who had intended to return to the village, was persuaded to remain in a guest room on the ground floor. By 11 o'clock the house was as silent as Greave Hall ever was, which is to say, not silent at all. The wind had risen, driving the fog against the windows in waves. The old timbers creaked and groaned with a regularity that mimicked footsteps. Somewhere in the walls, water moved through pipes with a sound disconcertingly like breathing. Every few minutes the electricity flickered, died, and rallied, casting the corridors in alternating states of dim illumination and absolute darkness. I was inside Gerald's room with the Cavendishes. Gerald sat in the armchair by the fire, his hands gripping the armrests, his face set in an expression of concentrated endurance. Sylvia sat beside him, her needlework in her lap, her fingers still. Neither spoke. The fire crackled. The candles on the mantelpiece threw wavering shadows across the ceiling. I positioned myself by the door, where I could hear the corridor beyond. My revolver was in my hand, and I will confess that my nerves were strung tighter than I would have liked. There is something about waiting for danger in the dark, knowing it is coming but not when or from which direction, that is far worse than facing it in the open. The trenches had taught me that, and Greave Hall was now teaching me again. Poirot was in the corridor, as installed in a heavy chair that he had commandeered from the drawing-room and positioned at the junction where the main corridor met the passage leading to the east wing. From this vantage point he could observe approaches from 3 directions. He sat in darkness, motionless, patient as a spider in the centre of its web. An hour passed, then 2. The house settled into its deepest nocturnal rhythms, the sounds becoming more regular, more predictable, the gaps between them longer. The wind rose and fell. The sea maintained its eternal assault on the cliffs. At 1:30 in the morning Poirot heard it. A sound from below. Not the routine complaints of the building, but something purposeful, a door closing with care, the creak of a step taken slowly to minimise noise. Someone was ascending from the cellars. He didn't move. He barely breathed. The sound came closer. Footsteps in the passage that led from the cellar stairs to the main corridor. Slow, deliberate, measured footsteps. The footsteps, Poirot realised, that Teller had described hearing outside the library on so many nights. Not a ghost, not imagination. A person, moving through the house's arteries with the confidence of someone who knew every step intimately. A figure appeared at the end of the corridor. In the near-total darkness, it was visible only as a deeper shadow, a movement within the stillness. It moved toward Gerald's room with purpose, making no attempt at stealth now, or rather making the kind of quiet that comes not from caution but from long practice, the silence of someone who has walked this route many times before. The figure reached Gerald's door, a hand extended toward the handle. Poirot switched on his torch. The beam caught the figure full in the face, Dr. Marcus Frome. He was dressed in dark clothing, his medical bag in one hand, his other hand reaching for the door handle of Gerald Cavendish's room. His expression, caught in the sudden light, was one of pure crystallized shock, the look of a man who has been operating in safety for so long that the possibility of discovery has become theoretical rather than real. For a fraction of a second neither man moved. Then Frome's face underwent a transformation. The shock hardened into something colder, more calculating. His hand moved to his medical bag, not to open it, but to grip it like a weapon. "I would not, Doctor," Poirot said quietly. "Captain Hastings is armed on the other side of that door, and he is a man of military experience. You will not reach it." Frome's hand stilled. The calculation continued behind his eyes. I could almost see it. The rapid assessment of options, the weighing of odds. Then, slowly, something drained out of him. The tension in his shoulders released. His grip on the bag relaxed. "How long have you known?" His voice was conversational, almost genial, as though they were discussing a diagnosis over tea. "With certainty, only since this evening, when I observed your reaction to my questions about Nathaniel Cavendish's death. You were too quick to provide alternative poisoning scenarios, Doctor. A man who had nothing to hide would have been defensive. You were eager to demonstrate your knowledge, the classic error of the intelligent criminal, who cannot resist showing that he is cleverer than his interrogators. And before this evening, suspicion only. You were always in the background, Doctor, always present but never prominent, the trusted family physician, the old friend who came and went without question. You had access to the house, knowledge of the family's medical histories, and, most critically, the ability to prescribe medications that could weaken or kill without arousing suspicion." "Gerald's heart medication," Frome said, and there was something almost admiring in his tone. "You deduced that?" "I deduced that Gerald's decline over the past months has been too rapid to be explained by anxiety alone. You have been treating his insomnia, his nerves, his heart, and in treating them, you have been slowly, carefully making them worse. The medication you prescribe does not help him sleep. It disrupts his sleep further. The heart medication does not stabilize his condition. It exacerbates it. You have been poisoning him in plain sight, Doctor, using your professional authority as a shield." I had opened the door at the first sounds and now stood in the corridor, revolver drawn. Gerald and Sylvia appeared behind me, Gerald's face ashen as he listened to Poirot's words. Philip emerged from his adjacent room, armed, his expression murderous. Frome regarded the assembled company with a composure that I found deeply disturbing. A man confronted with his own guilt ought to show some sign of it. Fear, anger, shame. Frome showed none. He might have been attending a slightly tedious medical conference. "You have it mostly right," he said at last. "Shall we discuss this somewhere more comfortable? I find corridors uncongenial for important conversations." We returned to the drawing room, where the fire had burned low but still gave warmth. Poirot had Frome seated in a chair in the centre of the room, with me standing behind him and Philip positioned by the door. The others arranged themselves around the periphery, a jury assembling to hear the evidence. Frome set down his medical bag, opened it, and removed a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. He placed it on the side table with deliberate care. "This is what I intended to administer tonight. Aconitine, dissolved in a saline solution. It would have been injected while Gerald slept. A simple procedure for a physician, requiring less than 30 seconds. Death would have occurred within the hour, as presenting as acute cardiac failure. Given Gerald's documented heart condition, no post-mortem would have been ordered. Another Cavendish dead by apparent natural causes, another victim of the curse." "As Nathaniel was your victim," Poirot said, "as Nathaniel was my patient and ultimately my patient's death." There was no remorse in his voice, none. "Nathaniel received a concentrated dose of digitalis in his evening wine. The collapse was rapid. The symptoms were consistent with a cerebrovascular event. I certified the death. No one questioned it. Gerald made a sound like a wounded animal. You killed Nathaniel? Marcus, you were his doctor, his friend. I was his physician. Friendship is a luxury physicians cannot afford. Nathaniel was going to change his will. He had told me so in confidence 3 days before he died. He intended to leave the house and its contents to a historical preservation trust, with Teller as the appointed custodian. The fortune, the money, the investments, the land apart from the house, was to be divided between you and Philip. But the house itself would have been removed from the family entirely. And that mattered to you because the house is worthless without the fortune to maintain it, and the fortune is inaccessible without the house. The trust would have locked away the property. The money would have gone to you, Gerald, but without the house there would have been no inheritance to contest, no family tensions to exploit, no position from which to operate. I needed the house and the money to remain together, in the hands of someone I could influence. Poirot leaned forward. And that someone was Gerald. Gerald was perfect, malleable, anxious, dependent on his physician. He would inherit everything, house, fortune, the lot, and I would manage him. I had been managing him for years, Monsieur Poirot. Every prescription, every consultation, every piece of medical advice was designed to increase his dependence on me. When the time was right, I would have guided him to make certain financial decisions, investments, transfers, a new will that would have ensured my own security. You intended to control the fortune through Gerald. I intended to earn what I deserved. 20 years of service to this family, and what have I received? A modest salary, and the privilege of driving through fog to attend to the ailments of ungrateful people in a decaying house. I have healed them, saved them, I nursed them through every crisis, and not one of them has ever thought to ensure that their physician might face his old age with something more than a pittance. So this is about money, Philip said, his voice flat with contempt. Everything is about money, young man, everything. Love, loyalty, devotion. They are all very well as concepts, but they do not heat a house or feed a man or prevent him from dying in poverty in a country cottage while his former patients live in luxury. Frome's composure cracked for the first time, a vein of genuine bitterness showing through the professional facade. I gave this family 20 years. 20 years of my life, my skill, my dedication. And when Nathaniel decided to dispose of his estate, he did not consult me. He did not consider me. I was the servant, not the family. And so you killed him. I ensured that his estate passed to someone I could manage, rather than to a trust I could not influence. It was a practical decision. A practical decision, Poirot repeated, and for the first time his voice carried an edge of genuine disgust. You speak of murder as though it were an administrative adjustment. I speak of it as what it was. A necessary action taken by a rational man in rational pursuit of a rational goal. I did not enjoy killing Nathaniel. I simply recognized that his death was the most efficient solution to an otherwise intractable problem. And Gerald, tonight you would have killed him too. Why now? Your plan was working. You had him under your control, dependent on your medication, declining slowly. Why accelerate? Because of you, Monsieur Poirot. Your presence changed everything. Gerald invited you, and suddenly there was someone in this house capable of seeing what I had constructed. Teller's theatrical nonsense was useful. It provided cover, confusion, alternative explanations. But you were cutting through it all. You found the bell, you found the passage, you exposed Teller. Every layer of concealment was being stripped away. It was only a matter of time before you reached me. So you decided to act tonight, under cover of the confusion created by Teller's exposure. The household was distracted, frightened, focused on Teller and Edith. Gerald was in a state of extreme nervous collapse, entirely consistent with sudden cardiac failure. If I had succeeded, no one would have questioned it. Another death, another victim of the curse, and with Gerald gone, Sylvia would inherit. Sylvia, who trusts me, who relies on me, who would follow my medical advice without question. Sylvia recoiled as though struck. You intended to manipulate me as you manipulated Gerald. I intended to guide you, Mrs. Cavendish, as I have guided this family for 20 years. The difference is that you would never have known. The room was silent. The fire crackled. The wind moaned in the chimneys. And in that silence, I heard the sound of a man's life work reduced to its essence. Not healing, not service, not the Hippocratic oath. but 20 years of slow, patient, methodical corruption, culminating in murder. Poirot picked up the vial of aconitine from the side table, handling it with extreme care. "Hastings, you will please telephone the police from the village, doctor. Frome will remain here under guard until they arrive." "The telephone lines are down," Frome said. "They often are in storms." "Then Tom Askew will drive to the village. The police will be summoned." Frome nodded, almost pleasantly. "Of course. I shall wait. I have, after all, nowhere else to go." Chapter 10. The Little Grey Cells. The police arrived from the county town shortly after dawn, the fog having finally begun to thin. Inspector Dawson was a large, methodical man who listened to Poirot's account with the careful attention of an officer who has learned that foreign detectives, however improbable their methods may appear, occasionally deliver results that merit respect. Frome went quietly. He offered no resistance, no last-minute protestations of innocence, no dramatic reversals. He walked to the police car with the measured gait of a man keeping a medical appointment, and did not look back at the house that had consumed 20 years of his life, and bred in him the conviction that murder was an acceptable accounting practice. Teller and Miss Edith were interviewed separately. Their conspiracy, the manifestations, the campaign of fear, was laid out in detail. Inspector Dawson took careful notes, consulted with his sergeant, and announced that charges of conspiracy to intimidate would likely be brought, though the severity would depend on the Crown prosecutor's assessment. "They won't go to prison?" Philip asked, and I was surprised to detect something other than anger in his voice, something closer to concern. "That is for the courts to decide," Dawson said. "But as I understand it, their actions, you mind, while criminal, were not directed at causing physical harm, the more serious charges of murder, attempted murder, fall squarely on Dr. Frome." The household gathered one final time in the drawing room that afternoon. The fog had cleared entirely, and for the first time since my arrival, Greave Hall was visible in its entirety. Stripped of its atmospheric shroud, it was still imposing, still strange, still beautiful in its way, a monument to 7 centuries of human ambition, faith, conflict, and endurance. Through the windows I could see the sea, grey-green and enormous, and the cliff path winding toward the chapel ruins, and the ruins themselves, stark against the sky. Teller was present, having been released on his own recognizance with instructions not to leave the district. Miss Edith sat apart from the others, her face set in an expression of such compressed dignity that one might have thought she was the one who had been wronged. Mrs. Roscoe occupied her customary position by the bookshelves, her composure restored, her dark eyes watchful. Gerald sat in his chair by the fire, looking not healthier. The damage of months of deliberate medical sabotage would take time to repair, but less haunted. The knowledge that his enemy had a human face, a human name, and was now in human custody had done what all the reassurance in the world could not. It had given him back his sense of reality. Sylvia sat beside him, and for the first time I noticed their hands intertwined on the armrest. Something had shifted between them during the long, terrible night. Whether it was temporary or permanent, whether it would survive the return to normal life, I could not say. But for now they were united, and that was something. Philip stood by the window as he always did, but his posture was different, less rigid, less desperate, more like a young man looking out at a view than a prisoner staring through bars. Dr. Frome's replacement, a young physician from the county town, had already examined Gerald and begun the process of identifying and reversing the damage Frome had inflicted. Gerald's medications had been immediately discontinued, his diet and sleep regimen adjusted, and the new doctor had expressed cautious optimism that with proper care Gerald's health could be substantially restored. "And now," Poirot said, settling into what I thought of as his summation posture, upright, hands lightly clasped, eyes bright with the particular satisfaction of a puzzle completed, "perhaps you will indulge me while I explain how the little grey cells arrived at the truth." "Must you?" Philip muttered, but he was smiling. "I must. It is, you will forgive me, the part I enjoy the most. Poirot permitted himself a small, precise smile. When I arrived at Greave Hall, I was presented with what appeared to be a simple problem. A haunted house and a terrified owner. The legend of Brother Anselm, the mourner, the curse, all very atmospheric, very Gothic, very English. My task seemed straightforward: expose the fraud and reassure the victim. But almost immediately I perceived that the situation was more complex. There were in fact two separate deceptions operating simultaneously, one layered upon the other like the strata of this ancient house. The first deception was the work of Monsieur Teller and Mademoiselle Edith. Their campaign was theatrical, elaborate, and, I must say, quite cleverly executed. The bell mechanism was ingenious. The costumes were convincing. The strategic use of the passage system demonstrated both resourcefulness and an intimate knowledge of the house's geography. Their motive was clear. Teller wished to preserve the historical treasures he had discovered, and Miss Edith wished to preserve the house itself. Both believed that Gerald's stewardship was a catastrophe that had to be averted. Miss Edith's chin rose fractionally. It was as close to an acknowledgement as she was likely to give. But their deception, for all its ingenuity, had a fundamental flaw. It was too obvious. The manifestations were dramatic, visible, impossible to ignore. A tolling bell, a robe on the stairs, bones in the ruins. These things demanded attention, provoked investigation, invited skepticism. A truly dangerous conspiracy does not announce itself. It operates in silence, in the margins, in the spaces between what is observed and what is understood. And that is where Dr. Frome was operating. His conspiracy was the opposite of Teller's in every respect. Where Teller was theatrical, Frome was invisible. Where Teller created spectacles, Frome manipulated the quiet, everyday mechanisms of medical care. A prescription adjusted, a dosage increased, a side effect dismissed as anxiety, a deteriorating condition attributed to the stress of the curse rather than to the medication meant to treat it. No drama, no spectacle, only the steady, imperceptible erosion of a man's health by the one person trusted to protect it. Gerald closed his eyes briefly. Sylvia's grip on his hand tightened. I began to suspect Frome when I observed the pattern of Gerald's decline. The timeline did not support the theory that fear alone was responsible. Gerald had been deteriorating for months, long before the manifestations began in earnest. His insomnia, his cardiac symptoms, his anxiety, these predated Philip's sighting of the mourner. They predated the bell, the robe, the bones. They began, in fact, shortly after Frome prescribed a new regimen of medication following Nathaniel's death. I considered the possibility of coincidence. I rejected it. In my experience, when a patient declines steadily under the care of a trusted physician, and when that decline serves the physician's interests, coincidence is not the most probable explanation. I then considered the death of Nathaniel Cavendish, a stroke, certified by the attending physician. No post-mortem, no questions. And yet, Nathaniel was about to change his will. He had confided this to Frome, his doctor and supposed friend. Within days, Nathaniel was dead, and the will remained unchanged. Mrs. Roscoe's role was revealing. She persuaded the family not to request a post-mortem. Not from malice, I believe, but from genuine respect for Nathaniel's wishes. Frome knew this about her. He relied upon it. He calculated that her influence would prevent the one procedure that might have exposed his crime. The mourner that Miss Edith saw before Nathaniel's death was the crucial clue, and Teller had not yet begun his campaign. Miss Edith's sighting was genuine. She saw a figure, and that figure was real. I believe it was Frome himself, walking the cliff path in the hours before administering the fatal dose, not from superstition, but from a cold, deliberate calculation. If the mourner was seen before Nathaniel died, the death would be attributed to the curse rather than to medicine. It was the first use of the legend as cover for murder, and it worked perfectly. When Gerald inherited and Teller began his own campaign, Frome found himself the beneficiary of another man's fraud. Teller's manifestations created exactly the atmosphere of fear and confusion that Frome needed. They drew attention away from the real danger, the quiet danger of tainted prescriptions and medical dependency, and focused it on ghosts and curses and theatrical nonsense. Frome did not need to stage manifestations. Teller was doing it for him. But Frome's patience had a limit. My arrival threatened to unravel everything. I was not fooled by curses, not impressed by bells, not inclined to accept supernatural explanations for human events. I was, in fact, precisely the kind of investigator Frome could not afford. He watched me dismantle Teller's deception piece by piece, and he knew it was only a matter of time before I turned my attention to the one member of the household who had been consistently present, consistently trusted, and consistently overlooked, the family doctor. Last night, Frome attempted to accelerate his plan. The aconitine he carried would have induced cardiac arrest indistinguishable from the heart failure his own prescriptions had been cultivating for months. Gerald would have been found dead in his bed, and every person in this house, knowing about the curse, having witnessed the manifestations, having felt the terror, would have accepted it. The curse of Brother Anselm fulfilled at last. Poirot paused. The room was absolutely still. But he did not succeed, Poirot said softly, because the little grey cells are not so easily deceived. The theatrical is always a distraction. The truth lies beneath, in the quiet, the ordinary, the overlooked. Always look for the one who is trusted. Always question the one who is never questioned. That is the lesson of Greave Hall. He sat down, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Gerald Cavendish said in a voice rough with emotion, "You saved my life, Monsieur Poirot." "I did my job, monsieur, which is what I have always done and God willing shall continue to do." There followed the practical aftermath that always attends the conclusion of a case. Statements to the police, interviews with lawyers, medical consultations, and the slow, difficult business of a household reassembling itself after catastrophe. Teller requested, and was granted, a final week to complete his documentation of the crypt before the police sealed the passage system. He worked with the fevered intensity of a man who knows that the thing he loves is being taken from him and is determined to preserve what he can. His notes, his drawings, his photographs of the monastic remains would eventually form the core of a scholarly paper that earned him considerable academic recognition, though the circumstances of its creation were never made public. Miss Edith retreated to her rooms and did not emerge for 3 days. When she finally appeared, she was unchanged. The same black dress, the same rigid posture, the same expression of comprehensive disapproval. But something in her manner toward Gerald had softened, almost imperceptibly. She served him tea without being asked. She inquired after his health without sarcasm. It was, for Edith Cavendish, a revolution. Mrs. Roscoe announced her intention to leave Greave Hall within the month. "The house needs its family now," she told Poirot. "My presence is a complication Gerald does not need. And I find I've rather lost my appetite for ancient buildings and their attendant dramas. Where will you go?" "London, I think. My manuscript requires a publisher, and publishers are found in cities, not on cliff tops." She extended her hand. "You're a remarkable man, Monsieur Poirot. I confess I underestimated you." "Many people do, madame. It is, in a sense, my greatest professional advantage." Philip Cavendish drove us to the station on the morning of our departure. The fog had cleared entirely, revealing a landscape of stark, austere beauty. The grey-green sea, the dark cliffs, the wind-bent trees, and Greave Hall itself, rising from its promontory like something that had grown there rather than been built, organic and inevitable. Philip was sober, clear-eyed, and possessed of a steadiness I had not seen in him before. Whether the crisis had burned away some of the anger and self-destruction, or whether it had simply given him something more urgent than his own resentment to think about, I could not say. But the change was evident. "I've told father I won't challenge the will," he said as we loaded our luggage into the car. The allowance is sufficient and the estate needs every penny for repairs. Teller was right about one thing. The house deserves better than neglect. A generous decision, Poirot said. A practical one. Teller's also right that the crypt and the passage system are historically important. I've suggested to Father that we apply for heritage protection. Let the scholars come. Let the house earn its keep. And you? What will you do? Philip smiled, a genuine smile without bitterness. I rather thought I might learn to manage the estate. Someone ought to, and I find I have a new appreciation for old buildings and their secrets. The train carried us south through a landscape that grew progressively gentler, the harsh northern coast giving way to rolling farmland, then to the ordered suburbs of the approaching city. Poirot sat opposite me in the first-class carriage, his eyes half closed, his hands folded across his waistcoat, the picture of a man at peace with his work. "Poirot," I said, as the towers of London emerged from the afternoon haze. "Oui, mon ami?" The sounds in the house, the footsteps Teller heard, the doors opening on their own, the cold spots. We never did explain those. Poirot opened one eye. No, we did not. Were they genuine? The house, is it really what, Hastings? Or haunted? He smiled. I'm a man of reason. I believe in what can be observed, tested and verified. I've never encountered a phenomenon that could not be explained by natural causes or human agency. The sounds in Greave Hall are almost certainly the product of unstable foundations, erratic heating, and the acoustic peculiarities of a 700-year-old building. Almost certainly. There is always room, mon ami, for that which we do not yet understand. The wise man knows the limits of his wisdom, and Greave Hall is a very old place with a very long memory. He closed both eyes. But I would not lose sleep over it. The living are far more dangerous than the dead. That is the one truth that never changes. I looked out the window at the approaching city, at the familiar, rational, electrically lit, centrally heated world of modern England, and I thought of Greave Hall on its cliff, wreathed in fog battered by the sea, and I wondered, not for the first time and not for the last, whether Hercule Poirot's certainties were quite as certain as he wished them to appear. But that, as my friend would say, is a question for another day. The end.